Let's begin where we left off last evening. Toward the end of class, Don Oscar was talking about the idea of faking it till you make it. And I gave a haji to that because it was too big a subject to explore in depth at the end of class. But I would like to reflect more deeply upon it this morning. It's a principle that we know well here and have discussed in many teachings that we often refer to with Judith Butler's phrase, the performativity paradox. You perform it, even though it may not be genuine, and paradoxically it becomes that way. We also have used the term profacred here, which is the combination of profane and sacred. And it is both making what had been a profane cultural gesture into a sacred one, but also faking being sacred rather than acting profane. Even if it's fake, it works. But what does it really come down to, this principle? It has to do with containment. Containment of what would otherwise be a lower chakra acting out. And so what this refers to, this whole principle, to the phenomenal plane vehicle of the self. It doesn't refer to the self. So this idea has nothing to do with the real sadhana of Sat Yoga. What it does do, however, is to make the physical vehicle capable of being a vessel of the supreme energies. Why? Because the body in its egoic form is too agitated, too distressed, too unstable, too traumatized, too out of control to be able to contain the infinite energies of God. And so the idea of the Dharma is to make the bodily vehicle a temple that is capable of receiving the energy of God and emanating it out. It is this that is the final state of the Jivan Mukta, or the avatar. But in order to achieve that, the bodily vehicle, the cellular memory, the impurities that have been somatized must be purified. And at the first and most superficial level, that's the purification of behavior. And we can't get rid of those agitated affects, but we can at least contain them. Now, I remember years ago, many years ago, I read a poem by John Ciardi, and a line of that poem has always stayed with me, and I think I've told the Sangha a number of times. It is that the power of the genie comes from being locked in the bottle. Okay? So the more you are able to contain those energies, you turn really the consciousness, it's not just the body, it's the body identified ego, you turn it into a hermetically sealed vessel. And this is the beginning of alchemy, what alchemy is really about. You start with the negredo of these black affects of the ego, whether it's anger and hatred, or despair and anguish of various kinds, or addictive lust and attachment and greed, whatever they are. By containing them and working on them internally rather than externalizing them, you gradually release the bound up energy that had projected objects either of desire or of hatred externally, and now you realize they are parts of yourself that you have hated or been greedy or envious of, or lacking in some fantasy mode, or in some way feeling demonic and unworthy. You take all of that in and you gradually are able to liberate those energies. The liberation of those lower energies are what allow the rising of the Kundalini. And as the Kundalini rises, you accumulate energy at the level of the third eye, the Agya Chakra, in the same way that you do when you meditate and are in silence. You feel the energy accumulating. Well, this becomes willpower. And this becomes the ability not only to contain, but to metabolize, to catalyze, to transform those energies from an external rule of behavior, which the Dharma is. You mustn't do this, that, or the other thing, which is why people don't want to be in an ashram. There's too many rules, too many things you can't do. You can't act out in this and that way. And of course, if you did act out in all those ways, we couldn't have a yogic community. We'd have a disunity. So for the sake of having a community alone, you must have a Dharma in which those rules of non-acting out and of impeccable behavior, and perhaps faking loving someone, or at least seeing the divine in them, and secretly you may hate them, but at least if you don't express that, that hatred will gradually get recognized as a projection of something that you hate in yourself. And so this is how people grow, okay? Emotional and psychological growth comes from containment and working through. And the more that you contain, the more that you're going to remember, and the more that will come up that you have to contain. And so it will start to seem actually harder than easier as you go on, because more and more primitive levels of the psyche with traumas that have been deeply repressed will start to emerge. And then you're going to be in a hell realm, but if you can contain it, that energy itself is going to bring you all the way up to chakra 7. So it's your friend, not your enemy, but you have to know how to use that energy. And that means keeping the Bunsen burner on the hermetic vessel at high heat, so that the particles of negative affect get released from the fantasy images and the signifiers. And then once they are released from that, they can morph into love. And then that love morphs into literally a love for the real, for God, which brings you the power of God that then comes into the body from that superconscious that had not been accessed. And then that fills the body and the cells with a new flushing out of the pranic energy that clears away the symptoms out of their somatized form and allows healing at a physical as well as an emotional level. But the containment must be impeccable. If there are any leakages, then you will often fall back into lower states and create lower kinds of tendencies of ongoing negative ideation, even if it's at a level below the threshold of consciousness. And this will keep eating away at you, and it will become somatized inevitably as acts of burning yourself in the kitchen, or other things not working, or losing things, or cutting yourself semi-accidentally, or having other kinds of sicknesses, or vertigo, or there's a million possibilities. Everyone knows it. Everyone's gone through it here. And you have to recognize that these are not simply physical random events, but they are the somatization of the soul's inability to process some indigestible experience that got lodged in its inner digestive system, and it can't either throw it up, although the desire to vomit comes from the desire to get it out physically, but of course that won't do it. You've got to get it out by mobilizing the energies that have been formed into fantasies, superstitions, fears of certain kinds of events, or people who look certain ways, or who are wearing certain kinds of clothes, or whatever. Millions of ways in which we get these superstitious fantasies of some kind of danger that's actually the danger of an undigested experience that has not been fully impurienced and worked through and then turned into the capacity for divine love and acceptance of all that is. So this is the purification of the soul. This has nothing to do with faking it. This has to really be done. You can't pretend to do that. This is the real work. But the keeping of the external behavioral level of Dharma is what forces you to do that work, which you wouldn't want to do under any other circumstances. And an ashram must have the highest possible Dharma if it wants to succeed in helping people reach the highest states of consciousness. Otherwise, we can be a very happy eco-village, an ego village, but we won't stay happy for very long, and we will not have helped people to realize the self. And so it will have been a futile and vain effort. The Dharma is what enables us to become noble beings. The ego is ignoble. It has lost its nobility. It is egocentric, narcissistic, demanding, complaining, and in all other ways trying to get out of its responsibilities for not only its self-transformation, but the transformation of the world. So it is the re-identification of oneself as a noble being that is the key goal that has to be kept in mind when you are determined to follow the Dharma. There would be no other reason to do this. You're limiting your amount of jouissance. The culture out there says maximize your jouissance, go for it. You know, consume everything and have every experience, travel all around the world, go everywhere except within, you know, do everything except transform yourself. And so that's the culture we have. It's a culture of avoidance and denial and externalization and never giving value to looking within, to transcending the ego, to becoming one with the supreme reality.